Hey guys, this episode of Anchored Devoted is going to be a longer one. So it's going to be about an hour long. Settle in if you don't have an hour to listen to it. Put it on pause and come back when you got a minute to spend on it. It'll be worth it. And we're looking forward to talking to you in just a moment. Thanks. Hey guys.
Good day, good day. We are back. This is two brothers that love Christ having a not fun conversation again. So if you haven't had your coffee or your lemonade or whatever you need to have a fun conversation, you might want to postpone it to the afternoon or whatever it is. Might need to listen to it twice, but we're glad you're here. I'm Brother Joseph, and that's Brother Jer.
Hey guys.
And this is, what is this, Jer?
This is Anchored and Devoted, brother.
Ta-da! There we are. We're at Anchored and Devoted. If you don't know, we have another podcast called Daily Gains that starts off at the beginning of the year. This is the one we started with first, called Anchored and Devoted.
And we sometimes get confused about which one we're doing on any given day, which is fun for us.
It is. Today, we're looking at what happened over the weekend up in New York, in Buffalo, New York, at a grocery store where a number of lives were taken. And this conversation is one more where I have questions for Jer. And so you get to respond, and you can ask me questions as well. This is a real talk, and I hope it's encouraging to some people to really wrestle with how we live out our faith. So, Jer, you had asked me earlier about, in one of our other podcasts when we got offline, how we work the whole evangelical thing as African Americans and how that works when it comes to politics. And I know we had talked about abortion rights and some other stuff. And this is one of those things where for me, it's tough because, as I mentioned in the other podcast, and I don't know what the order, because we have our planned topics and then the ones that we haven't planned. And this is one that wasn't planned. But my view of life is that I am pro it to the hilt. I'm pro it from the perspective of being gracious to those who were put in prison for charges that they should have been rehabilitated for. Pro-life for refugees, wherever they are. Pro-life for people in grocery stores buying groceries. And I don't see the same pro-life people at those various venues. And I'm not going to set you up with that question because my question is a heart question. I got a 7-year-old, and there's a typical Black conversation that a dad has with his son when he gets to around 12, 13 about what happens with police officers and whatnot. And you don't have to agree with it. It's my reality. And no one has to agree with it. Still the world I live in. And that's part of this conversation. What am I supposed to do with my 7-year-old when it comes to grocery stores now? And it's not just grocery stores, but in general. I already live in a special place where I know who I am as a Christian, as a child of God. Right? I know who I am. But how does it work when I have a little one, and now I have a little girl that was just born? Like, is the rule that I can only shop at white grocery stores? Or is the rule that, like, what are the rules? Because I don't know how to have a conversation with my son when I'm trying to get him to love well at 7, everyone, all of God's creation. And at the same time, I've got loss after loss, for whether it be from COVID, whether it be from, you know, an encounter with a police officer, whether it be going grocery shopping. There's a lot of loss. And this loss is not, specifically when we look at this case from last weekend, is not one where there was anything that I could do or anyone else could do.
Right.
And yet I have to deal with this weight, right? You don't have to deal with it. You're my white brother. You don't have to worry about that when you go into the grocery store. Now that's a new issue for me. I got to consider every person in here. Yes, I want to love them, and at the same time view them as a threat. Is like, that's crazy. That shouldn't be. And yet, if I protest, I'm viewed as the angry black guy. And my white family members won't speak at all because they don't view it as their issue. And so my issue today is, how do I deal with something that is my issue when I'm not the one in charge of it, or I'm not the one who can voice it or even engage with it because of how I'm viewed, right? This requires a white response and not a me response. And yet I'm struggling with, how do I deal with this with my son? And so I know that's a big snowball, hairy fireball of flaming, yes, but that's the world I'm living in. And to be asked by another coworker or friend or fellow believer how I'm doing makes me want to literally quit and move to some place where you don't have to deal with this, because this isn't everywhere. This isn't a norm everywhere. We can't, yes, racism is, but the way we do it in the US is not the norm. And that goes back to our history, but that's not the norm.
Clearly we don't, Dave didn't email me these questions ahead of time.
So I can get it started. That's easy.
There's a lot of things that I want to respond with, but the first one is to make sure I've heard you as my friend. Because I what I'm hearing from you is anger and pain, frustration, disappointment with the responses of others, disappointment with specifically a lack of a response, an expectation that there would be a recognition from those who don't look like you of the impact that not just this situation, not just this horrendous event, but that a series of these that can be tracked back and a pattern can be demonstrated. Your expectation that there would be a response is met with either, as you put it, silence or condemnation for making a fuss.
Correct.
Either I say nothing or I say, hey, calm down, it's not that big a deal.
Pretty much. And it's tough because my job is caring counseling, and I work at a church that's predominantly white, and I love my family in Christ. So that isn't the issue. The issue is just the opposite. Do they genuinely love me? Do they genuinely love Christ? And how does that work?
I'm being silent now because rushing to an answer after listening to your question and listening to you share your heart, I think is foolhardy and imprudent and uncaring. My response I have to first look and say, how was I affected by this? Because I was affected in a particular way. And it's natural for me, it's normal for me to respond to other people out of the way that I was impacted. I was impacted Sunday evening when I happened to be on YouTube looking through some videos, and YouTube's putting the news videos on like the second or third line on my iPad. And I saw this, and my first response is, not again. Why? Why does this happen? I mean, as a Christian, I understand why this happens. I get it. We live in a broken world. We live in a sin-soaked world. I have come to expect a level of security and of safety and consistency. And it's easy for me to believe that there is, in fact, some kind of providence that has changed the reality in which I live. But it hasn't. The reality in which I live is one that is covered in suffering. And it's covered not just in evil acts, but in evil people carrying out evil acts out of evil hearts. And that makes me sad. Because it's not supposed to be this way. It was not supposed to be this way. I've said it before, on this podcast in particular, I'm not going to comment on facts of a case that I don't have. This is one of those situations where I don't have facts in the case. What I have are the reports from the media, none of which I've looked into at all. I've accepted the reports that there was a 150 or 180 page manifesto that was full of terrible, terrible language, demonstrating the darkness in this young man's heart, and that he intentionally, according to the reports, planned and targeted a location where he knew that he would be coming into contact with Black individuals so that he could inflict the most casualties. I've not talked to this guy. I've not talked to any of the reporters. I've not talked to any of the investigators. What I can say is that these details, as they are horrendous. Period. It should never happen. Nobody deserves this. It's wrong. And what was done can't be undone. What was broken can't simply be fixed or band-aided over. Lives were lost. Lives were changed forever. And my first response is to stop and to be in that pain. There's pain for me in that. It's not the same pain as you have. It's not the same pain as those who were in the store or those who lost family members who were in the store. But it's pain. And I've learned through my life to sit with my pain before moving, because if I move too quickly in my pain, I either hurt myself or hurt other people I don't intend to. So oftentimes my first response to pain is anger. It's my first reaction. And oftentimes my anger gets misplaced someplace it shouldn't be, because I'm reacting. Man, I can't imagine having my 7-year-old son or my 6-year-old daughter come to me and say, "Hey, Dad, are we going to be safe when we go to the store or when we walk to the park.
And that's part of what makes it hard, because that's all that I imagine. When I get up to go for a walk in the morning, I have to imagine it. And my wife has to imagine it when I go for a walk without her. All right. Yesterday morning, I got up early. I went for a walk in the dark, got my headlight on. First thing out of her mind and thought before I even walk out the door is about what happened. Who else might be out there? And this isn't a new thing. This is just a consistent thing. And it's hard because it fades out of the news, but yet it's still my life. I don't make it the main thing in my life, but it is my life, and it's not okay. And the fact that we are supposed to grieve with one another and we don't. The fact that we're supposed to have something that unites us that is deeper than both flesh and blood, because we have the blood of Christ, and yet that blood doesn't unite us to the point of being able to see the same thing and to care enough to say, you know what, I'm going to make this part of my bearing fruit, my living out a just life. Because we know that the kingdom mindset is one, the kingdom focus is one, we're all going to be together worshiping God. He sees us as equals, and yet we don't treat each other that way. And I'm talking about in the church.
Mm-hmm. I'm tracking.
Like, this isn't, this is one of those things where.
No, this is not a political conversation.
Yeah, this is not political.
It's not Anchor and Voted.
This is, again, what do I say to my son? This is me having a conversation with you, and people get to listen in, but I'm for real. And to say I have no space for tears because I've done that year after year.
Yeah.
I have no space for hope because that clearly hasn't worked. It's real. If, I'm glad for social media. I'm glad for cell phones. I'm glad that we can see what's going on, but it was already there. And we can state the changes taking place at a glacial pace, and yet very much like a train moving down the track, it's still crushing folks, as we saw last weekend. And, there's a response afterwards where, churches will be happy to help and care for one another after the fact. But where's the intentionality and thought that we put in fighting so many other things as though someone else isn't worth it? And that's what I struggle with. I have, this year, but for the listener, I am the black guy with a ton of white friends. I went to the Naval Academy. I was a commercial banker. I'm this odd duck. I have Hispanic friends. I have Panamanian friends. And when I say friends, these are people I can call. We share a meal with, we laugh, we joke, and swap photos of kids. I'm not a big Facebook person, so you won't see photos of my kids unless you're a friend of mine. That kind of thing. And yet, when a storm occurs in Panama, I call my boy to see how his family is, or where things are and how things are going. When I hear of loss like this, the response isn't one to try and connect with the person, to care and be with them. It's to rationalize it away as just sin. And I go, okay, but that's not what you do again for the pro-life stuff. Oh my goodness, you are a 12-year-old and you are so into the mindset of I've got to defend my God and all babies as a 12-year-old because you've been indoctrinated from your family to the point of that's all, you literally are breaking down in tears. I've seen this child do this and I'm going, wow. And yet there's no thought about others. I get the reason why you're doing it, And again, I'm pro-life, so that isn't the issue. It's the reality that there is this blindness to how I view my sibling behind bars. Yes, they're paying their debt to society, but am I engaging in a way so that I'm journeying with them? I'm going into the prison system and tracking with them to say, hey, you know what? This is the work before us, 2 years, 6 months, whatever. I'm going to be with you every other week. I'm going to pray with you. I'm going to share life with you, because that's what we do as believers. Instead, it's no, you did your bit and I'll see you in 2 years. What kind of relationship is that? Again, what is the person supposed to do? You didn't value me enough to see me once a month, once every 6 months when I was away. So it's not an anger as far as I'm ready to go, I don't know, do something incredible.
Or at a grocery store or something.
Yeah, do something incredible, hulkish or whatever. It's a disappointment that there doesn't seem to be a tipping point for anger for others. A righteous or a holy or a just response. It's let's pray about it. Let's talk about it, but let's not do anything about it. Right? Our praying and talking was what we did, and the praying is the best thing to do. I agree, because God is the one in charge, and He can do all things. And at the same time, as we sing on Sundays, He's made us His hands and feet. So let's go do the work.
So you and I were in college when the DC shooter was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And we were on campus just outside the Beltway. And, the news reports were there's a white van going around and you might get shot. I didn't drive. I still don't drive, but most of the shootings were taking places in or around gas stations. I remember being with friends who needed to stop and get gas and having a very heightened sense of alertness, looking around for any kind of white van. And knowing that it might not be a white van. It might be a gray Subaru. But once we pull into this gas station, all of a sudden, I feel like there's a target on my back. Because it's not going to be coming from in front of me, At least if it comes from in front of me, I can maybe duck and cover. But the only sensation that I have is that wherever this danger is, it's at my back, in my blind spot, completely at my sex. A part of my response to what you're saying is I don't want to call this pushback, but I want to answer your question. When you're dealing with something, when you're dealing with a person who's motivated by hate, what is the policy? What is the action that we can take to mitigate this?
I will push back. I can't get in that conversation. And that's my issue. I can't get in that conversation. I can tell you from a counseling standpoint, my issue is as a Black male, I can't have that conversation. That person won't talk with me. They will shoot at me, but they won't talk. They'll drive over me. While I'm jogging in the Carolinas, there's no conversation there. There's no conversation. So I can't win. All I can do is suffer well. I can work in the school system, allow kids to engage with me and see me that way. But the reality is what's taking place in the home encourages a mindset that leads to actions which I have to respond to. because I wasn't, again, in the conversation.
So I agree with you completely. At a fundamental level, that there's an underpinning of worldview that is inconsistent with a biblical worldview that can be demonstrated in any of and in all of the instances that we can point to. Specifically, when we're talking about targeted attacks, we can talk about other types of violence. We can talk about abuses of power. For this conversation, Buffalo just took place.
Yeah, I'm not trying to muddy the water with everything.
I think it is an example of a 12-year-old girl who has been molded to understand that pro-life means I am against abortion, is a good example of either a 12-year-old who is rightfully underdeveloped in her thinking or his thinking, but also as an analogy for a 24-year-old or a 38-year-old who is underdeveloped in their thinking. That I can do something about, and that's something that we do things about. These are the conversations that we engage with as friends, as colleagues, and as parents to say, when you raise a question, what does it mean to be pro-life? And then you ask, okay, well, so how do you apply a pro-life paradigm to law enforcement? How do you apply a pro-life paradigm to reasonable gun control measures? How do you apply a pro-life paradigm to mental health treatment, counseling, intervention, mandatory sentences? That conversation is happening. I agree. It seems like it's at a glacial pace. And full disclosure here, I've been a part of non-denominational churches all my life, of a short 40 some years. Non-denominational churches don't have a history that goes back far enough to say, well, look, we were on this one side because we had this clear thinking. We were clearly wrong and we've changed our thinking, and therefore we've changed what we do. The downside to being in the non-denominational church setting is that we think that we're God's gift to Christianity. We think that God finally got it right somewhere around like 1975 or so, when the non-denominational church that we're a part of was born. And we've only ever held the right perspectives on hermeneutics, inspiration, and politics. I'm not a part of a Baptist church. I can't look back and say, actually, it was the Baptist churches in the South that were putting forth the best biblical defenses of slavery in 1840. I can't look and say, hey, it was my church, the Baptist church, that was writing letters to Martin Luther as he was in prison saying, hey, could you just cool it with this civil rights stuff? Could you just maybe be more patient? Nevertheless, while I identify, because I am half Puerto Rican and half Italian, when people look at me, all they see is a white guy in America with whatever stigmas or baggage or labels they may apply to that label themselves. And in a related sense, as a non-denominational 40-some-year-old white guy, I carry along the baggage of the traditions of all of the things, all of the conversations that we didn't have, all of the theological positions that we did step all over because we didn't want to submit to God. We didn't want to allow him to change our own hearts. And that's hard for me, because on the one hand, as you well know, I want to have these conversations. I think these are very important conversations to have. I think it's very important to go back and say, no, I was wrong. You know me, you can ask my family. That is not a statement that is difficult for you to hear from me. I learned a long time ago that I'm full of flaws. I'm full of contradictions. I'm full of self-assessments that are pie in the sky at best, diluted at worst. I know that about myself. It doesn't surprise me when it pops up again. Because of that, and because I care about you and I care about my God who's called me to be better, my intentional response is when I see that, I say, that's me. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. I misheard that. I misread that. I misunderstood that. I didn't have all the information. I spoke too quickly. Whatever, and all of the whatevers that may have gone into it. So on the one hand, I've been having conversations like this for 2.5 decades. And on the other hand, I can stand in for a white guy who has been the power broker in something that has a pattern that goes back much longer than I've been alive. And I neither want to downplay the reality of the evil that's going on, nor the sins that were committed by those with whom I am connected, even if I was not connected when they committed these sins. And there's another part of me that is frustrated because regardless of what I do, I am ultimately only in control of myself. And I want to see evil removed as well. But I know that that's not within my power to do.
So what do I tell my son?
What's he ask?
Are we safe at grocery stores?
I mean, that what I'm asking is, has he asked that?
Yes, he's asked. Unfortunately, this isn't a joke.
No, well, I mean, this is a conversation that we're having a conversation. Everyone else just happens to be looking over our shoulder.
Yeah, this is the real world. What do I say?
You're asking me, and my answer is this. Yes, you are. My 7-year-old son asks me that question. My answer is yes, you are. How would your son respond if you told him yes?
Well, I mean, I can tell you what I told him.
Well, I mean,
we had the conversation.
So
I think the bigger question for me isn't the yes, because that's what I told him. It was the fact that I have to have this conversation with my son, and that it's a precursor to the driving conversation.
Right.
That I'm now having or being forced to have other Black conversations.
Right.
That shouldn't be as a child of God, and knowing that I have to carry that. And I will carry it because I want him to be well and I want him to be wise. And there'll be Christian conversations that we'll have because, I expect God to turn his heart to him. And That's part of the journey, just like there'll be other conversations from male to male and whatnot. The tough part for me is that we had this conversation this morning, and in it, we then had to dive into unhealthy people versus healthy people.
Sure.
We had to talk about safe people versus unsafe people, strangers, and a whole bunch of other stuff that was really hard when, again, you have a group of people that were just going grocery shopping. So how do you work that when this stranger is not just someone trying to tempt you with ice cream or asking for help, which is the normal stuff you tell your kids. Okay, if someone asks for help, keep your distance and come get your parents or a teacher or someone to go help them. You don't help them. If a stranger offers you something, do not take it. Those are general conversations. This was clearly one that wasn't general. And it hurt my heart because, again, he's 7. And we've been mindful, with the news and whatnot, not so that way he doesn't bump into it. But he heard about it from school.
Right.
And, he's one of the few in his classroom that has to wrestle with this. So he was getting questions as a 7-year-old, which is weird. And yet we got to deal with it. And I know that there still has to be, as you stated, a freedom found in God to trust and be at peace, knowing that God has it all. That I'm in full agreement with that. My issue is, as I stated earlier, with us being the hands and feet of God. Why is it when it's a person who doesn't look like me, it's definitely okay for them to be put into the hands of God? But when it comes to a child who I can't see and don't know, I'm going to raise Cain. I'm going to let everyone know that this is not okay. It's do I value present life or potential life? Do I view present life as, and so even when I talk to my son, I'm shifting gears. When I spoke to him about, someone who's not healthy mentally, hurting others, how he needs to move away because you can't have a conversation. There is no rationalizing or trying to make it better because my son wants to make it better. So if someone's upset, he'll want to fix it, and he can't do that in this situation. So we have to talk about that. As much as you want to fix it, you can't. And so you need to go to a teacher. You need to go to a parent and let them have the conversation. He's big at 7, so he thinks he can have the conversation. This is hard because this really isn't the time for this conversation. And yet you don't have to have it. I do. Most people don't have to worry about it. And yet I know I'm going to have to reinforce this so that he understands. And he already knows when we go jogging on Sundays, which really isn't a jog, it's more of a sprint and a walk. That he has to stay with me, and he's free while he's around me. And I do the monitoring, and I do the checking, and I manage things for him with the understanding that we know I can't manage everything. God's in charge. But I can limit how many people are in the space and when we need to move. Okay, there's a lot more people here that I'm comfortable with. Let's move to the next thing. I can't do
But I do have to have those conversations with my kids.
Okay.
They're conversations I do have with my kids. They're not about grocery stores at this point. But if, and I hesitate to say when, but statistics say there will be a when. When it does happen, my kids are going to ask the same question. Are we safe at the grocery store? At this point, the question that they ask is, are we safe at church?
And that's because the
majority of church shootings that have gone on, at least that have been in the past a number of years, have been at white churches. sitting there on a Sunday morning, and someone walks in and starts opening fire. And I have to think about this from two perspectives. I have to think about this from the perspective of a parent talking to my kid. I also have to think about this from the perspective as the director of operations for a church responsible for the security of that church. And I'm going to answer my kids, not just in the theoretical of, are we safe going to church, but Dad, what has our church done to make sure that we're safe?
I hear you. I still think it's a different conversation when someone is hunting you. And they're hunting you based off of one thing that has nothing to do with your faith. When we include our faith in it, that's a different bear. This isn't being hunted for being a Christian. This is being targeted for, again, being other.
Sure.
And that is hard when you don't want that to be the thing that your child obsesses over. You want them to be free to make friends with children of all races and not to look at others differently because that's what they do to you. You don't want to pass this on. And yet, as I stated, I'm not in the conversations where it's being passed on to others. And I can't have a naive child walking into stuff where he's going to run into it and not have been aware. I get what you're saying. I hear you. And
I agree with your statement that there is a particularity to the history in our country that is, I'm not going to say it's unique, but it is very prescient.
Correct. And I would agree with that. We would agree with both of those.
I'm very prescient. Prescient to the state that to say that the impact or the experience is unique, I don't think that would go too far at all.
I still think it's interesting that on Sundays, just looking at the books, we're pretty much a racist country when it comes to worship. This is you and me talking. I don't care who's listening. This is where we seek comfort over Christ, where we seek, and I get it as easy. I think it's a trick from Satan, honestly, where we aren't under the pressure where we'd have to love each other well.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Just being honest. If we were at war, then it wouldn't matter.
You know what's interesting to me, man, is that you and I are having this conversation. We were born in the late 70s, early 80s.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The fact that we were having this conversation, the geography of this conversation, if you will,
mm-hmm.
that we're having today, our conversation, is so different than what this conversation would have been if we had been born 20 years earlier. Or 20 years earlier than that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I am both encouraged by and also hungry for is that this conversation is one where, how many interracial couples did you know growing up? Right? How many did I know versus how many do we know now?
True. There is
how many churches of not balanced, not equal, but more balanced, intercultural congregations were there 20 years ago, 30 years ago, versus how many are there now? The conversations have been going on. There's been a focus, and I'm encouraged by that. I'm also frustrated by where it's not, and I'm hungry to see it progress. And I agree, this is very much tied up in Satan comes to separate, to cause fear, to cause mistrust, to engender that, and then to separate and have us build a God in our image that looks just like us. And he's done a good job of that, and we've made it really easy for him. But what Paul tells us to do, because we are one body, is to stand
together. There's an understanding that this is something we do together. It's
whether you're talking about the metaphor of a military unit or a single body, together is the only way that works.
I agree, but that goes back to the grieving together, laughing together, worshiping together, living together, bearing fruit together, harvesting together. It's and yet it's often a goldfish life of, how are you doing with that? With what happened in New York? I could curse at you right now because you really don't care. Because let's just be honest, that's the goldfish view. You want to see me, but you don't want to know me. You don't want to be together. Like, you're not asking me this in relationship. You're asking me this behind a partition of, I'm safe. I've got grace. God's got this. He's got you. And I'm going to keep it clean. And you stay over there. So I'll ask you because I need to show this semblance of care, when the reality is we haven't been close enough to talk about just life in general. And now you want to ask me how this works. How's it working for you? Has your life changed? Like, I'm your sibling in Christ. Has your life changed? I worship with you on Sunday. I sing with you on Sunday for those multicultural, multi-ethnic churches. But you've never invited me to your house. Or if you did, again, it was out of guilt because the pastor preached on it because of what happened.
I think it's not out of. I think that's unfair.
I'm not saying this is for all. I'm not saying this is for all, because I know you and you love me and I love you genuinely. So I'm not talking about us specifically, you and me. And I'm not saying that us isn't in the church, right? I'm saying that there are relationships where, as you stated, people of that same 70s, 80s, 90s, and millennials, younger, all that kind of stuff, where they're seeing things different and engaging with things different. The issue for me is, where is that response that allows for, again, others to have uncomfortable conversations, because I have to have them. Right? I have to have these uncomfortable conversations. And my issue is, I feel as though I'm the only one who has to have it, when this is a church issue and there should be some other siblings having uncomfortable conversations with those individuals they can have them with. I can't get into those. I can get into it with my son, right? I can have the conversation. I can't get into it with the person who is, again, not a fan of me. Doesn't know me, but not a fan of me. Professes the same Lord and Savior I have. Professes their own thing. And this doesn't mean that they're going to be shooting. God bless. I work at a beautiful church that has racists in it. And I know them. I personally know them. I've hung up on them a couple times. It doesn't make it less true that they come and worship on Sunday. It doesn't make it less true that they prefer, like this is my issue. Like, it's not saying everyone. I'm saying that there's enough that it makes it so, again, I can't get comfortable. I can't be with you. I can't fully present myself, my wholeness. I can't bring it because you've got this other thing that you're holding on to more than relationship with me. And so I'm not saying that everyone, when they have a dinner or invite someone over, comes with this ulterior motive of, I've got to check the box. The pastor preached on race, so I need to invite a person of color over and we can knock that out and keep it moving. I'm not saying that, but I can tell you last time that happened, how many phone calls, and we've joked about this, how many lunch offers I got, and how many times have they spoken to me since then? 0. And it's been over a year. Because this is once a year, it pops up on the radar and we preach about it. And then I get a bunch of phone calls and then they float away. They didn't want to know me. Again, not saying
I
this is for
appreciate
all,
you throwing that gauntlet down.
right? I'm just saying this is one of those things where
That's real.
like I've seen it. This is not me being facetious or over embellishing. This is my life. I'm opening up and letting everyone in. And if you don't like it, that's not my issue, because this is where God has me. This is truth. This is it.
Just as a side note, if you know Pastor Dave, one of the things that he's rubbed off on me about is there are me problems and there are you problems, and I don't worry about the you problems pretty at all.
I can't. Again, this is where I am, and I love God. I love my life. Love the church I serve at. But I'm also not blind to it. I'm not blind to when things occur.
Yeah.
But I also have to recognize, again, what as you stated, I can only control me. So I can choose to respond. I go to God, I cry out to him. I look to love my family well, look to love my community well. And part of loving my community well is also recognizing, hey, there are parts of the community I don't get to engage with when it comes to these issues. They just are. And to expect me to keep learning to have new conversations now as things progress, as things, air quote, get better, right? If my son goes to the grocery store and he loses his life and you tell me things are getting better, I'm pretty sure I'm going to hit you with a car. Like that did not help at all. Things are getting better.
Sure.
No.
Sure.
It is heavy. It is real. And it seems as though, again, we have two different types of air, or we have two different types of water, or two different types of something in which, again, it's my problem and I can't work to the solution. It's a problem I have to address. And it's not something I had no role in the problem making. And yet politics, they'll say they can take care of it. Different groups will say they can take care of it. And it's hard when I know we're at war as children of God, because Satan is a deceiver. And so I don't sleep on the opportunities to have the tough conversations, to be real, and also to glorify God in the midst of it and say, we have to lift our heads to him. And we also have to do the work to be found faithful.
So let me ask for clarification here. With whom are the conversations needing to happen that I can have, but you cannot have?
The people in your circles. I don't know them all. I just know they will be able to hear you.
And these are conversations that ask the question, are you pro potential life or pro life?
Honestly, just to be real, the goal of the conversation is more a shared life, and then appointing people to see a full understanding of the gospel, in such that it requires me to recognize my brokenness and see everyone as just broken, and God, and everyone needing God.
Okay.
That is it. Whereas where I believe we are now is we want to fix other people. Like we get a scorecard for sending them to heaven, as opposed to seeing them like we see ourselves. If you go into a prison system and see how the actual system works, and then imagine a family member being there and then carrying that with you as you go to care for someone else. Now that other truly is my sister or brother, because I'm loving them in a way that is familial, not just I'm trying to win them to Christ, right? Because I'm on the evangelism team for prison ministry. When I do that, it allows me to be able to see this person's story, their full life, not just their mistake, or not just the ways in which I can save them, air quote, allows me to understand that I'm here to journey with them, and the journey is important. And God has the destination done. The conversations are ones where I don't know what thread needs to be pulled to have the veil removed outside of, again, this is a God thing. Having them really wrestle with who God is, where he is, but then also how they live out love. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So this isn't a simple, sign a petition.
But what you're talking about is starting with an identity conversation, which you and I have talked about over and over and over and over again.
Oh, no, correct.
Child of God.
Correct. I think it's
everything else is subsequent.
I think it starts there, and then it must get to the place where, okay, am I only looking at others that look like me as potential?
How do I square that with child of God?
Correct. Versus what Jesus did. He came for all of us, and none of us look like him. Right? Because he's God and man. None of us look like him. We can come with the dirty part of man, but not the God part.
Kurt Cobain looked a lot like Jesus, from what I understand.
Horrible joke.
It was a horrible joke.
We have to. This can't be just a wildfire kind of thing, and that's what it feels like for most. And yet, I think for most African Americans, it feels like we just live in wildfire country, as opposed to seeing it on the news and go, "Oh, we should pray for them and send some money." My hope.
Well, that's the bigger conversation here that we're not having right now. But when your friend in Brazil is hit by a storm and you call them up to find out how they are and you send them money, they could respond and say, "Hey, thank you so much for pushing in." They could respond and say, "It's because of the Grand Cherokee that you drive that's killing the ozone that's causing this storm." So
they could.
Why are you? And I'm drawing this as an analogy. There's so much here that I look at and I say, how do I respond and what am I responding to? I know this is not the question that you're asking, but it's in the atmosphere that we're talking in. The conversation.
Yes, there are other things that we can talk about, but if I've got a relationship with this individual where I've been engaging with them before things went sideways, then we can have conversations that are real. Right. If I only call you when something's going sideways, like what's going on now? How are you doing with New York? What do you mean? How am I doing with it? We don't talk. You want me to open up to you when we don't talk? You want a real me when this is, I don't know what this is to you, but it's not entering into your world enough to require you to engage with God from a grieving standpoint. And even if it does that, it still doesn't cause a change to recognize I have an opportunity to do something biblical, spirit-led, to aid my siblings in Christ in their life on earth. There has to be that place where the rubber meets the road. Okay, you know what? There was a missionary who, and I can't remember if we talked about this before. There was a missionary who went to a country in Africa, Caucasian lady. This is a true story. She's still running around in Virginia with a stolen child, so we'll get there. She went with the blessing of her church out of Virginia, and two churches actually funded her because she had gone on a missions trip the year before. She went on a missions trip with a medical missionary. She's not a doctor at all, but she went, she fell in love with the place, the opportunity, comes back, starts witnessing about how she feels called to this place. She raises a lot of money, goes back to the country, sets up a hospital, no credentials, money will do a lot. She begins to do procedures and people start passing away. People are concerned because they've been bringing their kids to this lady for help. At the very end of the story, after a number of seasons of harming people, again in the name of God,
right?
We can do a podcast on this. Like, I have no problem putting her stuff out in the street because I think she should be taken to court, and the churches that supported her. She decided that she was going to adopt the kid without paperwork. So she brought the kid back. He's living in Virginia now, teenager. He isn't fully aware of everything, but he is learning. Because when he was taken, he was much smaller. And all this was done out of a perspective of to care for these individuals, to love them as Christ loved her. I share this story because in all of its nastiness, again, true story, unfortunately, this is often what happens when people do get involved and don't take into consideration the people they're striving to work with. And so as we talk about, what is the image that we put forth before others, first Christ, but then also getting into the relationship with that other person and being with them, not just doing for them. Understanding and sharing life together so that they can get the more important thing of Christ as we work on the broken world around us, with the knowledge that it won't be made whole until Christ returns. It just won't. Whether it's the war in Ukraine, can't stand it. Again, I'm pro-life. This doesn't work for me. But it's still one of those things where we have to wrestle with, as believers, what is our response? Based off of where we are. Right? If you don't have any money, then I can't expect you to donate money to help, blah, blah, blah. That's just not where you are. If you don't have any minorities in your community, which could, I'm sure is someplace in the U.S., then it's hard for you to understand our conversation right now. But there still is the ability to learn and engage, especially with technology today, to remove that distance, to engage with your sibling in Christ so that you might know them and they might know you. And it's not simply an other.
I'm hearing you say, beyond what we've already said about identity, that Christ came to serve. And the mistake, the error, the sin that we often commit is that we enter into a situation not seeking to serve, but to discharge a responsibility that we feel a weight of.
Correct.
And discharging a responsibility that I don't want to carry because I don't like the way that feels on my back is not serving.
Correct.
The hand motions may look the same. You may carry the shovel and dig the hole the same way. You may even wash a person's feet the same way. You were at my wedding. Obviously, You're my best man.
I was there.
I washed my wife's feet just before she became my wife. And as you were holding my jacket, and I knelt down to wash her feet, and I never told you this, there was a change that happened in me. I started performing a rite, a ritual. And as I was washing her first foot, I was overwhelmed with the reality of what Christ did. And I realized in that moment what I was actually doing. And I had a choice. I could either pull back and say, hey, just doing something cute for the cameras. Or I can lean into this and embrace the fact that this is what my life is now committed to, regardless of how this backpack strap feels as it's chafing into my armpit. I'm here to serve. I'm here to lay down my life as a sacrifice so that others can walk on my body, but I am the one laid out on the glass so that you don't get cut. And that's a conversation that you can only have with people who trust that you love them. You can't challenge somebody, you can't guilt somebody into serving. You can demonstrate what service is. You can tell them why you serve them. You can help them understand that your service for them is a demonstration of your love. And you can invite them to follow in the same footsteps and show them the joy that you have in doing so. That's at least a part of the conversations here that we're pointing to and saying, are these taking place? And if not, why am I not having this conversation? Because if I can't have this conversation with anybody, I would say it's pretty demonstrable that I don't actually have a relationship. If I don't have a relationship, am I actually walking as an image bearer of God?
Well, this wasn't fun, so. But it was good. It was good.
Yeah, at least
I got a lot of work
on the night that we both had a lot of sleep.
Exactly. Literally 2 nights of no sleep. Just dropped my son off at school. It's like, okay, yeah.
If anybody is still listening to this, which is going for an hour, we invite your feedback. We invite you to join in this conversation with us. You can reach us at anchoredanddevoted@gmail.com. This obviously is not a lecture series. This is not a teaching series. We haven't purported to have the answers, nor to have given the answers, nor to have asked all the questions.
Correct.
This is an ongoing conversation. And
know that I don't represent every Black person, just like Jeremy doesn't represent every white person, especially since he's not white. But anyway, but just know, don't assume, please, based off of this conversation, if anything, share this episode with someone and then have a conversation about it. We love that as opposed to assuming something, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love you guys. Thank you for being with us.